Hello, everybody. My name is Jim Ellis, and the next presentation is by Agnes Eva Savich, and it's on mining your past.
Mike, you have to unmute your mic.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Okay, yep, good,
Yeah, okay.
good.
So I'm going to introduce Agnes here. She is a university program coordinator, oboist, and widely published haiku poet since 2004. Among her other activities, she founded in 2019 and still leads the Austin, Texas Haiku Group, served as judge of the Haiku Society of America Book Awards in 2022 and the Vancouver Cherry Blossom Festival Contest in 2020. She edited A Charm of Finches, the Haiku Society of America Southwest Region 2021 Members Anthology, and prepared the memorial presentation for Haiku North America in 2021. Savich has resided in Poland, France, and Chicago, and currently lives in Pflugerville near Austin, Texas. And it's all yours, Agnes.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the presentation. Can everyone hear me? I'm going to try to project. So this is the title of my presentation, Mining Your Past, Haiku from Childhood, Homeland, and Previous Writings. This was the description of it that you all had in the program. So I'm basically going to share my story with you through various photos and poems and early writings, and hopefully that will inspire you to dig into your own idea of childhood and homeland and previous writings to bring that into your current writing. So I know that, as was said earlier in the chat, the poem knows more than you do. So obviously my interpretations of my own poems are only a starting point as far as like the lesson I hope to withdraw from each of the poems. And what it means to the reader is going to be probably infinitely more important than what I started out for it to mean. But I'm going to attempt to at least use my writing as a sort of formula to inspire very specific kinds of writing from everyone. Oops. There we go. So we're going to start with the concept of childhood, and I have some photos, some traditions I'm going to talk about, and then childhood as definitely full of babies and children, whether that's yourself as a baby or child in the past, or children that are in your life currently, either your own or family members or friends, and then also thinking back to school years. So these can all be rich sources of information for coming up with your current haiku. So one concept, so I was born in Poland and immigrated here in the 80s at the age of 7. And one thing that is really important to my family, and I feel like Polish people in general, and of course everyone, but this concept of like the bonfire as a gathering place for families, for friends. So I have found that my haiku contain a lot of fire in them because it's something I've been part of. This is my mother and I building some kind of a bonfire out in the country in Poland a long time ago. The other pictures from, I was in Polish Girl Scouts, which is kind of based on the scouting model, but a little bit more military style. We wore these gray uniforms, and we had things like night patrol, where we had to protect the camp as children from unknown elements, which was really frightening. Our families would gather with other Polish families and have celebratory bonfires growing up. And then, of course, now I've continued this tradition.
Here's what I found.
Oh my gosh. Nope. I've continued this tradition with taking my own children camping. That's them in the background of that last photo, talking on a hammock while I build a campfire for us to eat around and commune. And the little haiku I have to share here is campfire smoke, wavering Cub Scouts out of the woods. So this is me taking my son camping with his Cub Scout troop. And as you see them coming out of the woods, full of their boyish energy, sort of through the smoke, that's why they were wavering, because, yeah, they were obscured by the smoke a little bit. So here are some more haiku that I have to share about fire. Stars, sparks from the bonfire, rise up to meet them. Campfire, cavemen in my bones. Cool night, the language of fire. So here, I think we've all seen haiku with sort of equating the fire that we have down here on Earth and then the fires of all the stars burning in the sky. It's a common image, but if you haven't written any haiku like that, I highly recommend everyone to sort of connect with that idea and see if you can come up with a unique angle on that sort of thing. Also, campfires are very, primal. So sitting around them, I always have this sense of like, human beings have been doing this across time through the millennia. And so I was really feeling that, one night, like connection to the early humans as I sat there by the fire. And then also that fire has its own language, its own sensual language. It's the play of the feeling of the heat on your skin. I mean, that is like a language speaking not to our ears, but to our sense of touch, and juxtaposed against the coolness of the night. I just thought that was a nice image. Some more fires. So this is my father setting a really giant bonfire at their lovely house in Wisconsin, where I go every summer. And that's some of my children and the neighborhood children there. I have 2 kids. Reunion bonfire. A hush as the elders recall their elders. Dwindling bonfire. A shooting star near Orion. After sunset, only my front warmed by the fire. So, as is the case around bonfires, sort of the oldest person around, which in this case was my father, would talk about, his dad, or stories would come up about other family members. Just kind of wanted to, and everyone kind of like is quiet because, oh, we're hearing an old story, so that's a nice warm tradition. The Orion piece, yeah, it's fun to think of constellations as sort of a little cartoon image that's happening in the sky. It's a fun exercise to try. Look up at the sky and think, oh, okay, it's like he's shooting a star through his bow and arrow. And yeah, the last one, just sort of another sensual view of fire, thinking about the sensations on your body from it. So yeah, this can all be a model for how to write your own fire haiku. So next, moving on childhood to actual children. So I have 1 son, 1 daughter, and it makes me think of my own childhood, but I wound up writing about their childhood a lot because I started writing haiku pretty much right before I started having kids. So a lot of my early work and continue, now they're teenagers, continues to be about them. So Supermoon, my daughter wonders about cramps. Early spring, my son wonders, who made God? That's the beautiful thing about kids. They will spring these questions on you, at 4 years old from the back seat on their way to preschool or something like that. Like, but Mama, who made God? You're just like, oh, my child. Thank you for this moment of philosophy. Yes, and of course, the early daughter asking about like cramps, pre-puberty, and things like that. It's a interesting, thing to think about. What do children ask you, and how can you work that into a haiku, because it can be so surprising, and wonderful, and it's nice to sort of jot that down as potential something to put in your work. This is an old photograph of my mother and I in Poland. At the time, so this was communist Poland, we would go out and wait in a lot of food ration lines, so that was definitely part of one of my early childhood memories. Here we are, I don't see any bags, so I'm not sure that we were out for a food run, but I love this photo so much. My mom says that she sewed that little coat for me out of, they got some old clothes. It was an old man's coat, and she she brought it down to like the little kid level. And when I showed her this photograph, she's like, oh yeah, I remember sewing that, and got so many compliments on it. And this poem I thought paired well with it. It's actually something I wrote about my own daughter when she was a baby. We were just outside looking at the backyard, and mother and daughter, each in her own thoughts, fireflies. So yeah, good capturing of, you know, a moment of childhood or a moment with a child. Just, it can be so special, and especially rooted in the season too. You know, it's summer. We're just whiling away the days, and you know, she's thinking her little baby thoughts, and we're both looking at fireflies, and they're just lighting up, and it's just a really lovely moment. That's another picture of the farm Agnes from rural Poland in the early 80s, juxtaposed with some of the poems that I wrote about my daughter. Duraflame, my daughter and I eat candy corn. Summer storm, my daughter's first. Summer storm, my daughter's first. Sweet Alyssum, my daughter's meds in a pink pillbox. Yeah, so that first one, I would say, if there's a formula for how to write a haiku like that, I was just thinking of sort of the elements of modern living, and you know, you have like these, a Duraflame is this fake log that you can light with a lighter on one end of the paper, and it burns for a few hours. It's easy. And then of course candy corn is not really corn, it's, you know, sugar solids, corn syrup solids actually. And yeah, so this sort of funny duality of eating this fake candy in front of this fake fire, and also going back to the theme of fire, of course. Summer storm, my daughter's first. I edited this one a lot, and it actually included a lot of words after first in all the early drafts, and then I was like, oh, it is so much better if you just don't state what her first is. The first of many, many, many things. I mean, daughters experience so many first things, and the second it landed in this iteration, I was so happy with it. It's nice to just like cut away that whatever you're trying to say and just leave everything else up to the reader's imagination. The power of editing, I love that one. And then of course the Sweet Alyssum, these tiny little flowers. I think I was planting some last year in my garden here in Texas, and my daughter was going through a rough time during the pandemic, mental health wise, and so, you know, we had this medication for her, and it was in this little pink pill box, and I just remember thinking, God, you know, it's like such a adult heavy thing, but then we're like trying to put it in this like cute little girly box to kind of soften the impact of what's happening. So again, sort of like this pairing of like the very serious what's going on, but also like the playful, or you know, trying to find the silver lining, or this sort of healing aspect of nature, and also just trying to soften the blow of this heavy thing that's happening. Rain, my son doesn't know why he's sad. Pelican, my son demands goldfish. Old growth forest, a boy catches up to grandpa. So I chose this picture to go here because there's this sadness that you see in kids, that's, you know, childhood isn't all about happy memories. Like sometimes they are just sad. Like sometimes they think about their existence, or they think they're just caught in a moment of not fun and not, you know, not anything really. And so I love this one because I don't know what I was thinking, but I've experienced this with my kids too, where you just catch this little tiny child with this like very serious look on their face, and you can't fix it. It's just sort of the beginnings of the existential crisis we all face at some point. And it's good to think about that, and kind of also, you know, try to infuse that into haiku. And then there's humor, of course, as well. This juxtaposition of being on a pier with all the pelicans, and they're trying to get food from people. And, you know, meanwhile, my little 6-year-old, I think he was at the time, is like, Mama, I need a snack. So I had, you know, purse full of goldfish crackers, as mothers do. And that was a funny juxtaposition. So yeah, just, you know, out on vacation with with kids kind of capture like what's happening, and it can make for a very funny haiku sometimes. And then of course as I mentioned, we always return to Wisconsin in the summers. So we were hiking through the Ice Age Trail near my parents' house by Holy Hill in Wisconsin, kind of northwest of Milwaukee, and very, very old forest there. And my son ran up ahead to catch up with my dad, and I just thought that was a really cool moment as well. Night nursing, how small the earth in the universe. First cry, I too am born a mother. Deep winter, the baby's bottle of moonlight. So, in thinking about your own, when you were first born, there's this very profound, you're this small helpless being, right? And just thinking about this tiny microcosm in the macrocosm of the universe. So I'm just struck by sort of the zoom, right? Like not only does a child make you into someone new if you're a mother, right, or a father, that first cry signals your own beginning as a parent and their beginning as a human being. And then the deep winter. Oh yeah, this is a haiku that's been mentioned before in another presentation. I was struck by how the late feeding here, the moon was coming through the window, and it looked like the milk in the bottle was actual moonlight, and it just struck me like in this, we're huddled together in the cold. Well, not that cold because it's Texas, but cold Texas, huddled together, feeding my child. So I actually breastfed both my children, but in this case, I happened to have, it was a bottle because I was having some medical problems. I had to have some MRIs, and so I had to sort of pump and save it. And so it was a rare sort of few days where I actually had to feed the bottle. And so maybe that deepens this haiku. I don't know. The fact that what's in the bottle is actually moonlight or my own milk. I don't know if that makes a difference. Anyway, here's another picture from the old-fashioned 70s stroller in Europe there. Baby name book, I run into old boyfriends. So again, it's nice to bring humor into these kind of moments as well. While choosing a name for your baby. Chrysanthemum, droopy with rain, the baby yawns. Cherry blossoms, dreams beneath the baby's eyelids. So yeah, so both of those are kind of like just a really natural little moment paired against flowers. Just sort of jotting down, okay, the baby yawns. It's kind of almost boring, but it's so pretty with this, the way that the chrysanthemums get so heavy with rain and their little heads are drooping just like the baby. And the cherry blossom one I think was a Vancouver honorable mention or something like that. Just seeing the delicate little REM movements under the baby's eyelids, and then under the cherry blossoms. We actually had a cherry tree in our backyard, so we would sometimes nap under it, and this was like an actual literal juxtaposition that was lovely to capture. All right, and then we move on to school years. You can have your own, memories or thinking of the kids that are going to school. First day of school, wisteria spills over the brick wall. Middle school play, the Mad Hatter's voice cracks. So that first one, I know it's wisteria spilling over. It just makes me think of like crying. When my kids started school, it's very momentous. Like, oh my gosh, they're gonna spend the whole day away from me, and it is a beautiful thing, these flowers spilling over the wall. But it's also sort of the tears of the mother of this whole transitional thing happening. And then of course the humor of the Mad Hatter being even madder as a little boy with his voice starting to change. Lecture hall, the changing viewpoint of the fly. The cadence of a professor's voice, cherry blossoms. So again, yeah, just sort of school memories, good things to capture, thinking through your own school past and how that might translate into a haiku. All right, so now we're going to move on to the concept of homeland a little deeper. So we're going to talk about ancestors and family, how to get into those memories from childhood, if you've ever gone back to visit your hometown, your homeland, what that process of remembering is like, and also, you know, as haiku writers, we try to keep this childlike view of our current world, so that's also very important. And I would also say childhood itself is kind of a type of homeland, like returning to that sort of like liminal space of childhood, of the childlike view of the world, and it's important to nurture that inside ourselves so that we can continue to have these like this fresh view of the world, to capture things very simply and, you know, but with the wisdom of the years to kind of juxtapose it against more profound things. So so I wind up also writing a lot about grandparents. This is actually my great-grandmother, Misha, and she actually is a survivor of Auschwitz. This is her after she already escaped. She was able to come back when my grandmother here in this, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but in this far edge of the photo, that's my mother's mother, so my maternal grandmother there. So that's her mother. So yeah, and sort of thinking through that generational stuff being handed down in your own DNA, right? So Hubble Deep Field, all the great grandparents in my DNA. Family mantle, the ashes I'll inherit. Family mantle, the ashes I'll inherit. So yeah, I actually do have my grandmother's ashes, which I realized I will actually inherit because they will keep going down through time, and that was kind of a profound realization that thinking through time and all the history and the grandparents. Communist childhood, waiting with grandmother for salt and pepper. Yeah, this was told to me that sometimes, you know, you never know what you'd get in those lines, and sometimes you'd get this little bag of salt and pepper, and that was the ration for the day, or you'd get a couple sausages or something. And fortunately, my family, half my family were farmers, so they were able to get more sort of the eggs and stuff. But you know, I mostly lived in the city with my parents until they emigrated before me. So we did have to stand in those lines when we couldn't go back to the farm for some supplies. And here's little me with my two grandmothers. The one with the braid is my father's mother, and the one on the other side is my mother's mother. I'll just read these haikus. So the one about my father's mom, that's Yanina was her name. The way she braids her long gray hair, winter evening. Rivulets of rain, peaks and valleys of her wrinkles. Yeah, so she had this beautiful long hair, twice as long as mine. And she grew it her whole life, and she would spend hours she would brush it out and then put it in this braid crown that she would then pin up. And that's one of my favorite memories of her. So I wanted to capture that. I think that's one of the first poems I ever wrote back when I started 20 years ago, and I think Acorn may have picked that one up, so I was really happy with that. And then the other grandmother, Danusha, she was the last one standing. She lived until just a couple years ago. In 2019, she passed away. First chill, grandmother's sweater, now mine. Early spring, great grandma's grin from the treehouse. Yeah, so on one of these trips to Wisconsin, you know, she came down there when my kids were there, so she's their great grandma, and she actually did climb partway into the treehouse at the age of, you know, 81 or something, and she just was smiling like, "Isn't this silly? I'm climbing a treehouse." So I thought that was really sweet. And then yeah, I actually did inherit her sweater, which I love wearing now. It's like, you know, wearing a hug from her. Late winter wind, grandfather's grave across the ocean. Waves slowly cresting towards shore, a faint moon. So this is my father and me on the Baltic Sea. That was one of the vacations we took in Poland. Rode a train from Krakow all the way up to the coast, the Baltic, and there we are waiting around in it. And of course, when my grandparents started passing away, I was already in America. And oh, I should mention this last grandmother that passed away. She actually is the only one that moved to America. So she was here. She was in Chicago. But when my grandfather passed away on the farm, he was far away. So it was just sort of like brought to me, across space and time. I was just reflecting on how far it is and how removed I felt. And, it was sad that he passed away, but there was this buffer of, space and time between us. And one more family member. This poem is actually published in a non-haiku magazine called Tribe. They had a short poem call at some point, and so I sent this in, and they chose it and paired it with this crazy image. But my uncle's cheeks red with vodka as he grills sausage, which happened quite a lot. We're big sausage eaters in Poland, so. And vodka drinkers. Everyone around the family table would take a little shot of vodka after dinner. Grandparents, octogenarians included. It was really fun. Tiny towns from above, the self I was when I emigrated. Tiny towns from above, the self I was when I emigrated. Yeah, so I was actually separated from my parents for 3.5 years. They came to America and then thought I would be able to come back over, but there's the whole Iron Curtain thing, and I could not get out for 3.5 years. So I was separated from them, and this is the farm, the old farmhouse. I always call this my 19th century childhood because everything was in black and white in my head, and so were the pictures, but this farmhouse didn't have, it had a wood-burning stove, it didn't have a bathroom, I had a little outhouse, or actually I had a chamber pot, I do remember that, so very 19th century. So I stayed there until I was old enough to go to school, and then I moved in with my aunt in Krakow and finished first grade there in kindergarten. But that's the little town, the rural town. It's that small. It's just that little cluster of houses around that intersection, and that's Boczkowice is the name of the little town where, I spent summers there when I was littler, and I've gone back since, but that is where I was at first in my idyllic little childhood. So sometimes when you're able to return, as I have several times back to this small village, you can capture a lot of haiku that kind of bridge, where you are now, where you've been. Childhood village, my reflection at the bottom of an old well. Among the photos of my parents' vacation, grandmother's coffin. So that was one time where they went back without me. They went to my grandmother's funeral, and I was looking through the photos later, and that just struck me that's what showed. I mean, of course they were there for the funeral, but it was still shocking to see it in a photo. And the reflection also, sort of looking back through time. I'm in a sense visiting, from another time now as a, older in this village, and yeah. This is one of my favorite memories of my childhood. Endless sky, a poppy pod's rattle empties into my mouth. Across the street from that little house, there was a field where we had many fields, but this one particular field had poppies growing. And I just remember walking through there as a little 4 or 5 year old, just cracking those things open and eating the poppies, which is really funny in retrospect. But fresh poppy from a field is so delicious. I can't even tell you. So that I actually just wrote this haiku remembering this for this presentation. I should send this out somewhere because I really like it. This is the day I immigrated to America. So this is me outside the airport. Finally have that visa, a political amnesty visa that was granted to me. My parents were trying all these different ways to get me to come over to America, and finally there was through my mother's work, she worked at this radio station, WCEV, we are Chicagoland's ethnic voice, and the owner of the station had some political connections and finally got this political amnesty visa through these political connections, so I was able to fly over. The quiet farm, I fill my jet lag with stars. cornerstone, my inner child traces the date. Now this is my own childhood, but I'm gonna say that these poems were written about my children, but it was making me remember when I was little as well. Goodbye to her sleepover friends, spring wind. Growing up, the wildflower field, shadows of kids. And this is another return. So when we returned as a family, once the Berlin Wall came down and communism started to go down, we actually rented hammers and chisels. You could rent these things in, what was this, 1989, I believe, or 1990. You could rent them and you could actually help destroy the Berlin Wall. And there were tables selling big chunks. You could buy them as a tourist. But my dad and I just looked at each other. We're like, oh yeah, we're getting the hammer and the chisel and we are bringing that freaking wall down ourselves. So this is my actual piece of the Berlin Wall that I had hand chiseled during this trip. And it's here in my house. I think my dad has his as well at his house. So Ode to Joy, my hand chiseled piece of the Berlin Wall. It's a great artifact to have. Spring lightning, my favorite toy in an old photo. The violin I never got to play. Yellowing leaves. So again, just kind of thinking about your own past and what's special, what stands out to you about your own wants and needs and loves from your own childhood. So, final piece about this childhood section, this idea of returning to wonder. So Tom Clausen has written, haiku returns us to the wonder and curiosity we had as a child. So to actually immerse in your childhood memories helps us access that more directly. And of course, fast forward to what could be called the infancy of our own creative process, and that's another way to engage with that fresh original view, but with the wisdom of passing time and experience. I will get to that at the end section where we talk about your early writings. Annual hike, familiar poems at every turn. So a good way to engage with this childlike view is just think like a child. Don't overthink it, right? So here's a few haiku that came out of that. Just at being like a child out in nature. Summer breeze, milky circles on my palm from a dandelion stem. I lag behind to check out a huge snail. Late summer. Moonless, the sound of sandals on grass. Just the sound there. And finally I have this, oh, not yet. A tiny snail nestled in tree bark, autumn chill. Sunbeams, a leaf twirls just for me. So yeah, a good thing, actually Jeff Hoagland has always inspired me to do this. Just get down low with that nature just in front of you, magnifying glass, scoop up the tadpoles, whatever, and just observe it, like real close. And every time you'll be rewarded with something very, very special. So you'll notice that teeny tiny snail in the tree bark. You'll notice that just one of the leaves is twirling in the sunbeams. And then I invite you to step into this poem, which is from Bones, published in Bones. You are looking at a waterfall. You're looking at the immensity of the water, the kinetic force of it building up, and then it falls away. It's all caps. It doesn't have to be finished. So I know these one-word poems have been done before, Tundra, things like that, and that this was sort of my entry into that genre. Right. So, how do we deal with all these memories when writing? Here's some quotes I pulled out from a presentation or an essay that Michael Dillon Walsh wrote. A memory, once clearly stated, ceases to be a memory. It becomes perpetually present because every time we experience something which recalls it, the clear and lucid original experience imposes its formal beauty on the new experience. Has it ever struck you that life is all memory, except for that one present moment that goes by you so quick you hardly catch it going? Tennessee Williams. The past isn't dead. It isn't even past, said William Faulkner. This photo is from a photography project I did. I was studying at a photography institute during my year abroad in Paris, and I was doing this double juxtaposition thing, taking a roll of film twice blindly. So this happened to align with these people crossing the street, and then a cemetery, a very old cemetery. So this is like the sense that all of time is with us at all times. This was published in Heliosparrow, this image, so I wanted to bring that up. All of time is with us, the future, the past, right? So this is more quotes from that article by Michael Dillon Welch to help you sort of figure out what to do with memories, right? Past is always filing by. So even if you're writing a haiku about something you just saw, you're still recreating it from the seconds past, okay? Or decades past, right? The point is to make the reader experience it as it's happening in the moment to trigger your past memories, even if the moment is drawn from your own very far past. The concept of enter late, leave early, right? So as in screenwriting and playwriting, a memory in haiku is best served in medias res, to bring the reader into the center of that moment. And haiku isn't just your history, it transcends time, says Michael, especially when that moment touches upon universal aspects of our shared existence. So I'm going to play this classic Scout song that we sang around the campfire and ask you to consider these things for a little workshop moment. What are the sensory details from your own childhood that you can think about? What does it feel, taste, smell, sound like? What are some family traits you've inherited maybe? Some sayings or expressions that get repeated in your home or community? What are some of the rituals or practices that come to mind when you think of your childhood? And these questions are from an essay by Dr. Sarah Rope called Where I'm From Poems, Exploring Selfhood and Identity. So let's take 2 minutes just to kind of jot down what memories of your childhood you might use in your work or your homeland.
Płonie ognisko i szumią knieje. Drużynowy jest wśród nas. Opowiada starodawne dzieje. Bohaterski wskrzesza czas. O rycerstwie spod kresowych stanic, o obrońcach naszych polskich granic, a ponad nami wiatr szumny wieje i dębowy huczy las.
Okay, I'm going to make that just 1 minute because I realize I'm going to really run out of time. Jim warned me. I sent him this presentation. He's like, you're not going to finish. And yeah, I have a lot more slides. So I goodbye slide. All right, we're going to look at past work now. So I'll cut into question time a little bit. I want to get through some of this. So the good thing about your past work, it's already written. That's half the work, right? And I want you to think about and trust and honor that your early creative spirit has value. I know it's easy to look at that stuff that you wrote when you were 20 or 30 or whatever and think, God, that's cheesy, there's nothing salvageable here, but really, there just might be. And editing now, you have the gift of time or perspective to maybe turn that into something good. So, looking at the recent past, State Park Foraging for Words. I do have a very short video, but I'm going to skip it now because it'll be in the presentation that I mail out. But I had a project on Texas State Parks haiku, so this was a way for me to look at my recent past and look at the photos. I'll just play 2 seconds of it. But photos that I took during the pandemic, I every month went to a different state park. And then afterwards, I had all these beautiful photos from my hikes. And I paired them with some of the haiku that I've written across other times and turn it into this really lovely photo project of haiga. So you will be able to get a link to this afterwards. So I'm going to just stop it here. Oops. Oh no. There we go. Pause. Next. There we go. So your early work. Are there any concepts that were at the core of your early work that you can see bringing back as themes in your current haiku work? And even, can any haiku be withdrawn from the early poems you've written, even the cringy first haiku attempts? It's worth it just to kind of look at your old stuff every once in a while just to see if there's anything salvageable there. So for example, for me, I've figured out some of my core concepts are things like time, writing, love, longing, microcosm, macrocosm view of the universe. And I'll just read these real quick. A pair of trees that never touch. Spring longing. Railroad crossing. This time I've been given. Writer's block. Everything is a clue. The smoothness of my lover's face. Snowy evening. Deep winter. The weight of stars. Beyond stars. Normandy. The blood below this white sand. Dangling acorn. The universe in each of my atoms. In the dark, we are ageless, shooting stars. Also, a thing from your past you can mine is maybe if you've ever dabbled in psychedelics, and that can be a really weird, rich source of haiku, kind of like dreams are, right? Lysergic, dissolution, suburban walls. Psilocybin, a silo of self in a forest. Indica, I turn into a lily. Oops. Also, if you can remember classes you took in college or concepts that maybe aren't part of your daily life, but that can also be a really great source of haiku. So the first one is from philosophy class. Leibniz's monadology came back to me one day. A Mandelbrot, of course, is a graph that it looks essentially like a fractal. And then the last one, gravitational wave, is something from astronomy. A big thing happened where the two black holes merged, and they proved that gravitational waves exist because we actually can measure them on Earth. So those three haiku are from that. And I will just move on because I know I'm running out of time. This was an interesting haiku that I wrote. There's a sonnet I wrote in high school, featured this idea, which came up a lot during the dream presentation recently, by Jacob, right? So the fine blue line twixt dark and light. And so I was thinking about this, my old poem, and thinking I wanted to write a haiku about it. Distant birds, the thin wall between asleep and awake. So sort of always thinking about that concept, but I did pull it out of that old sonnet. So yeah, the perspective of editing across time, right? If you've ever written short stories or you have travel journals or diaries, they're really great sources of haibun. Sort of you get the perspective of time to add that haiku 25 years later or however long, and it can really deepen the meaning of that piece because the juxtaposition can't help but be startling. You can't help but reflect on the themes of the prose, complementary detail, because you have all this space and time to make that cognitive leap to really get that haiku juxtaposition on the prose. And this photo is another one from that Paris photo series. It's my friend Marcus, who lived across the way, and some water from a fountain or a body of water. So yeah, time is the best editor, right? Time, David Cobb says, to be a good haibun writer, you need to be a good editor. The essential rule is it should be interesting and not wearisome. And so time offers us this perspective on, okay, what's bad? What needs to go? But also, what's special? What's distinctive about my early voice? Like, it might be worth something. I think objectivity increases over time. It lessens the emotional connections we have to these initial efforts, and so we can really kill our darlings, as the saying goes. It can also get you out of that zoomed in focus you experience when you're first writing, and you can really just see the big picture. So here's some examples. I won't read all of these, but for example, I had this travel journal from when I backpacked across Europe after my year abroad, and then I turned it into this haibun. And the perspective of time allowed me to see myself in this, and so the haiku that sort of capped this whole thing was bursts of Arabic. I doze behind a veil of blonde hair. So really feeling my otherness in this sort of setting of Morocco. And then here was another short story I had, and this was published in Blue Outlier Journal, where again I cleaned up the prose, and then I had this, spark that went to something that wasn't in the original story, which was a crow. So chilled to the bone, seeing the crow see me. And it's this whole a run I went on, a little bit of an existential crisis I was having at the time in '98 while living in Paris. And finally, Haiku. Your old photographs can be a wonderful source of Haiku as well. So this was my parents' backyard, which I know it's ridiculously beautiful, but they're lucky to have this as their backyard. And the poem is actually something my friend Jan Benson, rest in peace, dear Jan from Texas, she wrote the poem that went with it. Saffron hour, the sun a crystal singing bowl. Yeah, I love that one. So yeah, the last thing I have is a workshop moment for which I will also take 1 minute, and I will play recording, as I'm also a musician. I play the oboe, right? But I also play flute, and I made this beautiful flute piece that I will play 1 minute of. And while you consider what core past concepts and interests have always been important to you that you can integrate into your present, think about your own early artwork, photographs, drawings, and short stories, journals, and kind of just jot down, like, maybe I want to go back to that. Where is it? What could I use in my current work? And I will play this. Ah! No, I won't play it. Yes, I will. There we go. No! Here. Listen to 1 minute of this flute piece while you think about these things. That was the minute. So, in summary, be authentic. Bring your whole self and your story into your work. What reference points comprise your uniqueness and voice as it applies to your creative work? And in considering this question, think about all these things that are on the screen here: origins, childhood, culture, memories, travels, music, landscape, colors and flavors and traditions, the stories, your early work, and your unique perspective. With thanks to these journals for publishing all the poems within this presentation, and I also have a list of references to some of the things I quoted, and I will send out a link to this presentation to all who are interested. There's my contact info. Thank you all so much for listening to my first presentation ever.
Well, I will say as the host, can people hear me? I will just say that was a spectacular presentation, and I'm stunned the way you put it into the time frame. You edited on the fly. So does it, by my count, we have a minute and a half or so. Does anybody have a particular? There's wonderful comments, Agnes, in the chat about as you were proceeding, which are just wonderful. They kind of read as a poem. But does anybody have a specific question or comment they'd like to make in our last minute?
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you very much, Agnes. When I'm editing the Haiku journal, one thing I always can tell, or all the team say, we can tell if work has a lot of time has been spent on it. Mm-hmm. And I'm very fascinated. You say go back to the stuff you wrote even 25 years ago. And I remember Raymond Carver used to put his poem or his short stories in a drawer for 6 months and not take them out for 6 months. And then he'd read them once, and then he decided either to continue editing or throw it in the bin. And I think that one of the things that is really worth thinking about is if you're doing something, writing something today, leave it for a few months before you come back to it. Would you agree with that, Agnes, if I may ask you? Or has that occurred to you, or do you do it yourself? I'd love to know.
Oh, of course. Things have to marinate. I mean, they just have to marinate, and I just leave them alone for a while. Sometimes I love them so much, I'll submit them right away. But in general, it's so great to let them marinate. And I don't think anything should be wasted. I think your early work should also be considered. You know, maybe it's not the best, but maybe you can edit it, or maybe you can find that spark that connects you to your original intent that, you know, speaks to your core as a artist, and you want to use it. So I definitely recommend saving stuff, letting it marinate.
Anybody else? Got a minute, I think.
Jeff's hand is up.
All right, breathless, just breathless. It was fun to go on a journey with you. I would imagine that most of us are have done this mining of the past in some form. Usually for me, it's this quiet moment where something slams me in the head. But you've presented kind of a real, almost like a recipe of how to approach this, and that's really helpful. And no way is that your first presentation, man. That was amazing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Joel's hand is raised.
Yes, I was flashing back to the concept yesterday of the ginkgo walk, which was going out and finding small things and cogitating on them, then coming back and writing about them. It's just those simple things like your memories, or the smell of your grandmother's sauerkraut on the front porch in the middle of the summer. Oh, she said it was ready when it smelled like a dead body. But even so, those types of things just reinforce to me just how important it is writing small, seeing small. Nice and good presentation.
Thank you.
Well, Agnes, thank you so much. And I think we should try and stay on time, as Jay had said. And so at 4 o'clock, it is Jay Friedenberg and Colleen Farrelly, a computational linguistics approach to understanding haiku, which is the approach I've always taken. That's a joke. I mean, that sounds very different and very fun. So that's in about 9 minutes from now. So again, thank you very much, Agnes. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Agnes, a question. How did you come to haiku?
Well, it started with a very stupid online haiku generating contest that some newspaper had. I don't remember what it was, but it was like they would post a little picture, I guess, and then it was that, and then they also had like those poetry letters, like you had a limited set of words, and so I just wrote haiku, and I just enjoyed the process so much. I gradually wanted to know what like real haiku are like, and somehow discovered various things. Like Charlie Trumbull had a group in Chicago, and I went to their meetings. That sure showed me the right path right away. Among other things, I subscribed to Frog Pond, eventually, and John Stevenson wrote me a very nice email back about my first submission, like, "Oh, you're clearly just starting out. Here's some advice." And so, yeah, had some really great early mentors as I weaned away from this 575, newspaper online contest back in 2002 or 3, around then.
Agnes, I just wanted to ask you, since we do have just a small number of minutes left here, your oboe piece was wonderful, and you seem to be a polymath in being good at everything. How does the music, like, how does your musical, I know this is sort of, not really directly related to your talk, but how does your musical ability and your musical sensibility play into your haiku? Do you ever do you hear auditory resonances and things of that sort, or did you totally separate in your mind, or do they ever integrate?
Yeah, they've been surprisingly separate. I mean, I really I wouldn't say I even write that much while listening to music. I mostly write while immersing in nature. Like that's where I do most of my writing. And so, yeah, I see it as separate things. And I've been trying to put more music in my haiku in some ways, like about music or things like Beethoven or, things that make an appearance, because I feel like I should bridge those worlds better. But yeah, right now it's like I have my writing self, my music self, my other selves. Yeah, it's right, a little bit separate.
Yeah, some
Agnes.
people are compartmentalized like that. Sorry, go ahead, Claire.
Oh, Agnes, thank you so much for being so generous and sharing of yourself in this presentation. It is just priceless, and it's full of uncountable number of gems. So thank you so much from my heart, and I want to read and hear it over and over. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Agnes,
Yes.
I really love that photo of you and your daughter in the rain. Who took that wonderful photograph?
With the umbrellas?
Yes.
That's actually my mother and me back in Poland in like 1978 or something. So
Oh, okay.
I actually don't know who took that
I'm
photo.
sorry, I said that wrong. You as a child and your mother, but who was around to take that photo of you walking? You never knew?
No, it's possible my dad took it. It might have been before he left for America, because he said he occasionally, a friend would have a camera or something like that. We were, as a family, we were trying to figure out where did that photo come from. I just came upon it in my photo album, and he thinks it's possible he took it, but yeah, I'm not really sure.
It's wonderful that you even have it, because if it wasn't taken by a member of your own family, it's great that somehow or other it ended up in your hands.
Yeah, no, very lucky to have some of those early photos.
Lovely presentation, lovely haiku.
Thank you so much.